Hello, bright and early everybody. We are joined by Lift.
Good morning.
Very early for Lift today, so thank you for getting up. Also, thank you to Violet for getting up.
Good morning.
And of course, our special guest today, Monsieur Bob. Hello. Well, actually, should I say, what is it? What's morning in French? Bonjour, I guess, is day, so bonjour.
That sounds right. Good morning. Thanks for adapting your schedules for me.
As we all know, Bob got the gold run in Dark gift, so a huge congratulations there. We do have a confirmed guest for an upcoming podcast, which is a very special wizard, so more on that later. We're probably going to have some short podcasts in the near future explaining some explicit mechanics, something a bit like the Adventure Queue video, so expect those in the coming weeks. Plastic Lobster and CD Rock have been very, very hard at work creating queryable databases, compiling the community data in accessible formats for the new path, that is, to Crazy Random Summer. So you can check out the links we're about to provide in podcast chat to see what that's all about. So there's a seed download, there's an item query, and also an effect query database. So we're not going to be discussing the challenge path in too much detail, if at all, until it's got full support from Matthew and we've kind of sorted out the seeds, and then we can start talking about how's the best way to approach that path. Without further ado, it is Monsieur Bob. This is kind of the podcast trope. So your name, Monsieur Bob, where does that come from?
I don't really have a good story behind it. I started playing KOL when I was in middle school. I was taking French at the time, and I probably thought that Monsieur, with a clearly not French name, was funny.
You've also got a very interesting Discord name. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what it is?
My Discord name is Turd Chomper. When I started playing Pokemon Go, I was with some friends at a bar, doing the kind of things that you do at a bar. And so we all made accounts and we're trying to see what we could get away with their naming filters. So came up with Turd Chomper. Pokemon Go said okay. And then eventually found out that was also a multiplayer game with a community. So that was the first Discord that I joined. And now that's just going to follow me everywhere.
Quite an old player of KOL, is it? Did you start in 2004, is it?
Yep.
So 2004, but I believe you also fairly recently came back to KOL, is that also correct?
Yeah, so I played KOL a lot for the first year and a half or so after I joined, and then took kind of a long break. I came back at some point in 2017, jumped right into some hardcore octogenarian runs that took me 2 months to finish, and eventually started getting more items of the month, getting, down to 3 or 4 day ascensions. But part of the challenge coming back then was to be competitive in standard, you kind of need a full set of items. Set up a subscription, and then I played a little bit early last year, and then kind of left again when the Pokemon Path came out, and then came back just in time for Dark Gift with almost a full set of in-standard items, which made playing Dark Gift a lot easier.
Was relearning the game hard after your long hiatus?
I'm going to say no, just because before my long hiatus, I never really learned the game. I think you can probably tell by how long and inefficient some of those first Ascensions are. I wasn't paying attention to item drop rate or combat modifiers. I did a bunch of, unnecessary side quests a lot of the time. It wasn't until, after I came back from that first really long hiatus that I made any sort of effort to do anything close to speed play.
Effort. So what steps did you take to start learning some of the speed play?
I downloaded Esendor's guide, and that really is most of it.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool.
Just using that, I think that the first run where I used guide, I went from like 8 days to 4 just off the bat. That really helped show me all the places that I was wasting adventures or didn't understand the mechanics of a quest or the progression.
Yeah, I use guide every single time I ascend.
I don't know how people play on mobile without it. It sounds terrible.
Well, we're going to take a look at how you planned your runs, so a more in-depth look later. But Animus, is it next over to PvP?
It is indeed. So Violet, take it away.
This season is Optimal Season. Started on May 1st, and it's going until July 1st, so you have plenty of time to get your swagger.
What does the season reward actually do?
This season's reward is the ROM of Optimality, a purely cosmetic effect. It enhances your profile, does absolutely nothing otherwise, just makes you look really cool. It makes your name bigger, but you also get to have stars on your profile.
Who wouldn't want that?
Some people go to great lengths to get gold stars on their profile.
Right, exactly. And it also lengthens the number on your level also.
I forgot that part. Adds zeros to your level. How are the PvP boffins making the most out of this season? What's the crazy stuff they're up to maximize their minis?
So this season, it's difficult to dominate. Optimal Season, there's not really a clear way to win it. With PvP in general, it's not like an Ascension path where you follow like a guide. You just kind of have to be able to be fluid with it and adapt. Especially with this season, there are 3 competing outfit minis in this season.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't ever win against everybody. It's like playing rock, paper, scissors. If you completely buff one, you're going to lose another one. So you kind of have to decide what the best way to incorporate all of them is, where you can still beat a majority of people. And then if you're trying to beat someone specifically, you might just have to adapt.
Following that kind of rule of thumb, does that mean it's better to go for a jack of all trades rather than, like, for example, to put on really short gear that has numbers in it, or to just go all out on numbers, for example?
I would say if you're just trying to get swagger, like, a mix is fine. And then you will probably be able to beat a lot of people that way.
Is there any really kind of crazy things people are doing to get absolutely every little bit out of a mini this season? Like, I think in a past season, people were like using rubber spiders to fight more beasts and all sorts of crazy stuff.
It's mostly like an ascending season, like where you want to ascend a lot to stay on top of the most recently ascended mini, and then there's the familiar rotation, so whoever has used the most unique familiars throughout their ascensions. And then of course the turn dump minis this season are in the war, because it is the Iron Betas, so you have to do the 5 side quests in the war. The protesters, so that one is about just killing the most
protesters. Does that mean we actually want to spend as many turns there as possible?
We want to spend as many turns there as possible before you clear the protesters.
So you skip every non-combat, basically.
And what's this I hear about wanting to avoid ode to booze?
Oh yes, the optimal drinking mini. It is who has obtained the most turns of effects while also drinking. So it counts the number of turns you get from effects from drinking booze. But if you cast Ode, it subtracts, because it counts Ode as an effect, and then you're actually subtracting turns of effect while you're drinking. And that goes as well for the Accordion Thief barrel buff, the Beer Barrel Polka effect.
What do PvP people do? Do they prefer to have the 15 turns? Or do they prefer to have the score bonus without using Ode?
I think in a season like this, where there's not really a lot to spend your turns on, like in aftercore, I would say you would not want to have the turns.
Okay, makes sense.
So basically the only thing in aftercore would be the basement.
Right. Thank you very much, Violet. We're going to move on to PirateRealm, I know this is obviously the April item of the month, but we were waiting for the Signal Island stuff to get implemented. But I think is it Riff who's still quote indisposed. Whatever's ailing him, we wish him a swift recovery, and we can always slot it in later on if it's relevant, right? Bob, you can probably tell us, why was it that we preferred PirateRealm to DD in, for example, Dark Gift?
In hardcore, the DD is terrible, sort of, because you take elemental damage, and healing in DG is not the easiest thing to do. And Pirate Realm, on the other hand, the sailing adventures and stuff, you actually can regen HP during those. So it was nice to be able to throw some turns at it if you just needed a few turns with the doctor bag to recover from, an elemental fight or something that had knocked you down.
Absolutely. How long does a daily dungeon cost without any gelatinous cubeling items, and how long did it take in Dark Gift?
Is it 9 turns?
I believe so, yeah.
If you have all the skeleton keys, which I don't think is ever an issue. Yeah, so it'd be 9 turns, which is Pirate Realm. If you're able to escape from a storm on the fast ship, I think, does that knock it down to 8?
It does indeed, yeah.
Yeah, so if you got the coxswain that can help you escape storms, I think Pirate Realm was definitely the right move.
You're dying to give this anecdote, Liv, so go ahead.
You had this decision come up in your hardcore run on whether or not you should try and outrace the storm. And you calculated out and you took the risk at the time to hopefully save a turn.
Mm-hmm.
But a friendly Discord member, Philemon, what did he calculate for you?
Well, I was thinking, it's my last turn in that I have to sail, so if I take the storm, I have a good chance to save a turn, because the super likely to repair your ship if I die, and the super likely to find the island would compete with each other. The only thing I didn't actually take into account was the fact that I didn't need another turn to get the island. So I was basically risking 75% chance to break even and a 25% chance to lose a turn, and I lost a turn. So yeah, just sending the message, right?
It's your last adventure, don't risk it.
Yeah, you don't need to risk it because you're not saving anything. And I wouldn't have noticed if it wasn't for that pesky Philemon. So plus 1 turn count for absolutely no reason.
So one thing to keep in mind with Pirate Realm is this should be one of the first things that you check when you start your day, so that you have above 40 adventures and you're not buffed up. You cannot have over 100 stats. So go ahead, check first thing after rollover whenever you start your day. If you're doing a key, let's say in Dark Gift, you'll want to get the Glassjack Spyglass and hope for it's a coxswain that gives you a chance to sail faster, and then pick your Swift Clipper, and then I usually picked my island right away as well. And then after you've picked those initial choices, all the way up to boat, then even if you have less than 40 adventures, as long as you've gone through those selections, you'll be able to adventure there. So not a good thing to forget to do when you only have 15 turns left and still need that key.
In terms of Ascension relevance, obviously it's a source of a third key. If you've not got Fantasy Realm in a standard run, because you would be doing DD both days and then Fantasy Realm, so it's not really too relevant unless you don't have Fantasy Realm. When Fantasy Realm leaves standard in 2021, it will be the only source of the third key, assuming we get no more, but this feels very unlikely that we won't get more key sources. Its Ascension relevance is a little bit up in the air at the minute. There's a notable skill book, which is Prevent Scurvy and Sobriety, which gives you 3 bottles of rum, which is nice for making drinks, either with a robot tender or just miscellaneous. It gives you 1 to 2 limes and 1 to 2 grapefruits, which is useful for the oil of stability. The limes, that is, which is an equalizer for muscle using the scrumptious reagents. For aftercore, the notable item is the Lucky Gold Ring, which it has, I think it's a 20% drop to drop a random currency from a charter that you own / some amount of meat. It seems quite lucrative to run, particularly on free fights. Perhaps also farming as well. I haven't done the math, and I'm not sure about the rates of whether you're more likely to get this coin or that coin, or how many coins you're going to get in a day or whatever. But I'm sure there's math somewhere on the forum somewhere. There's no scripts for Fantasy Realm yet. The reason being that, as Endora said, she has written one, but she doesn't want to release it because it still hasn't got a way to beat the particularly annoying monsters on the last island. I think, is it the storms or is it the signals? One of those where it's non-trivial to defeat them. Oh, Starry pointed out that you can use 1 day passes, and if you have that zone open, you will get stuff from the ring. So if you have a Bath pass and Bath open, you can get fun funds, I assume is what they're trying to say there. The best way to farm fun appears to be getting either a wide-eyed or a... Go on, Lift, you had this one down.
Horrorquipus here.
Let's go with that. And taking Red Roger's flag and using the slowest and most cannon-ridden ship, which is the Man of War, so you get lots of pirates and civilian fights, and then doing the Red Roger questline over and over to farm that fun up. You can also use Saber Friends on skeletons to get even more fun. I think most of this is covered in the guide I posted in the podcast chat. I believe that pretty much covers Fantasy Realm for the time being. Well, let's move on to the Saber and, relatedly, the nerf that happened recently.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by the 4th of May Cosplay Saber Kit, for when you need someone to find 2 friends and meet you back here so you can save 20 turns on your Ascension. Order yours today at Mr. Store.
You want to cover the Saber first or the nerf?
The basics of the Saber first.
The Saber, when we say basics, just equipping it gives you a 20% to all stats, +4 prismatic damage, and +1 prismatic resistance. It was very useful in Dark Gift, especially right off the bat in the kitchen. It also allows you to upgrade your Saber once per day, and you do this by clicking the upgrade link in the inventory, and this gives you 4 options. You can get between 15 and 20 MP regeneration, +20 to monster level, +3 prismatic resistance, or +10 familiar weight. 4 options that you can choose from once per day. It also, when you attack, it uses your highest stat. Is that correct?
It is indeed.
It doesn't matter what class you are, you can still attack with it, and it will use your highest stat to attack. And it also has some incredible abilities, which is use the Force, and then your player name. What are some of our options?
We have 3 options, all of which end the combat in, I want to say new way, but based on an old way. There's something called a rollover runaway, which is where if you enter rollover whilst you're in a combat, the combat would end without being resolved, so it wouldn't count towards, if you had a wrong familiar out, it wouldn't count towards that familiar being used. You wouldn't get any drops, it wouldn't burn delay, etc.
Just aborts the combat.
As if it never happened. The Force, using the Force is essentially the same thing, but then you're given a choice encounter where you have 3 options. The first option is the first option the banish?
It is. It's I am not the adventurer you are looking for. It's a 30-turn banish.
And then the second one is called Force Friends, which we'll go into much more detail in a second. And the last one is a pseudo Yellow Ray. I say pseudo because it doesn't give you a debuff. Does it otherwise work like a Yellow Ray, or has it got other nuances?
It has nuances because it works on witches pieces, which was kind of surprising. So I think when we talk about our conditional item drops on a future episode, we'll definitely cover it. And also, using any of these 3 skills does not take a turn, obviously, because it's like a rollover runaway. So no turn spent.
So we're going to give a little bit of background about the Grops nerf. And when we say Grops, we obviously mean the Green Ops Soldier, which appeared in the trivial updates recently. Now, to give you a little bit of background, in Standard last year, with Steely-Eyed Squint, we could extend Steely-Eyed Squint by 10 using 2 primitive alien boozes from Spacegate. We also had Stone Wool for another 3. And then we had, I think, was it 5 free kills or...
4. We had the 3 Shattering Punch, 1 Gingerbread.
4 3 kills. Quick maths. That is 17 turns of Steely-Eyed Squint, which means 17 turns of being able to cap green smoke bombs from the green up soldiers.
Or close to it, because Champagne was only 11 turns.
Right, of course. The green up soldier has a chance, a 5% drop. Well, it used to be 2 5% drops for the green smoke bomb. 90% chance run away, that is. However, the nerf, that's been reduced to only 1 green smoke bomb per green up soldier. Now, not counting spent resources and opportunity costs like banishes, macros, etc., we were getting like around 40 bombs plus in standard last year. Does that sound about right, Lift?
That sounds about right. I think I had 44.
However, in Dark Gift, now this is something Bob will be able to tell us about as well, is that after the introduction of the Saber, it was crazy. How many bombs did you manage to get in one of your runs, Bob?
I think the highest I got, like 43, 46, something like that. I got over 40 multiple times in hardcore.
Someone in the Discord got around 55, I think was the record, 56, 55.
56. I got 51. You got, what, 55?
I think I had a run where I got so many, but the problem is that this was before the routing was developed enough, so I had nowhere to use them. So I ended up having like 20 bombs left over. But yes, it was something really crazy.
Did you skip nuns for that?
No, I just had almost every single Grops that I encountered in that run just gave me 2 bombs. It was nuts. But sadly, they weren't utilized. Makes me quite sad. So with the introduction of the Saber, it became almost imperative to get a bounty in your run because you were wishing for the green up soldiers so that you could cast the Force Friends. And the Force Friends ends the combat and then creates 3 copies, high priority copies of that target in its native zone. So you would wish for a green up soldier, use Force Friends, and then your next 3 combats on the battlefield would be 3 green op soldiers.
And this is unique because you could fight these 3 Force Friends copies before the green op soldiers would naturally appear on the battlefield. So you weren't even losing encounter rates after the 400 kill mark.
Absolutely crazy that you could get Grops before that point. You can have a look at the flow chart, the encounter flow chart, to see where these friends come in, but they're higher priority than super likelies, higher priority than non-combats, obviously. They're quite high up there. They're also higher priority than Kramko goblins, so you can actually put on your Kramko sausage grinder for the extra item without any risk of running into a goblin whilst you don't want to. One other good use for the Saber in Dark Gift was bloopers, but all of these uses for the Saber, they were really complicated and a lot of maths went into it. We looked at it a bunch of times to figure out the right way to use the Saber. So with the blooper, basically, you were waiting for either the blooper to come up or that you'd already spent a bunch of banishes and macros to try and get the blooper. And depending on that information on the fly, and whether you have Transcendent Olfaction available, you could either resort to a banish or you could resort to a Force Friends. In Dark Gift, generally what we would do is spend a bunch of banishes, and depending on how many white pixels were left, like let's say we only needed 9 white pixels left, then we would probably use a Force there, as a Force would be equal to 9 white pixels because 3 bloopers. However, it was soon very apparent that Green Ops Soldier was like the absolute best friend pick, because assuming a wish on day 1, you would get 11 Green Ops fights on day 1 and then 11 day 2. If you could somehow get the Green Ops to carry on over rollover. And one way to do that would be the Lover Namarang. So on your last friend fight of the Green Ops on day 1, you would use a Lover Namarang, which lasts through rollover, and then you would fight that on day 2, and then do the exact same strategy again, using your Champagne charges to try and get as close to 1900% item drops as possible. And like Lift already mentioned, the absolute craziest part is that you could fight them before they were even available in the war. So that's before 400 hippies, which was why it was so incredibly good. Assuming best case that is 11 fights day 1, 11 fights day 2, before 400 hippies were killed, you were getting, accounting for opportunity cost and -4 bombs from the wishes / enamorangs, 40 green smoke bombs is best case. So that's something like 38 free runs that we would normally not have got. So the Saber, in theory, was saving 38 turns just alone. Lift, do you want to mention a little bit of niche things about what you can do before you actually use the Force?
So in Standard, because this ends the combat just like a rollover runaway, you can have the opportunity to do some interesting things. Mainly that items that you pickpocket or hug pocket with the exoskeleton, you get to keep. So you can potentially combine this for a lot of fun, let's say with a dairy goat. So if you are a Moxie class and you pickpocket and you have an exoskeleton, you can also use the hug pocket. You can get a goat cheese and then use the Force and yellow ray it. And so now you have 2 goat cheeses for 0 turns spent. So you could finish the goatlet in a single turn, because your next combat, if you olfacted it, you could grab a dairy goat, and now you have all 3 goat cheese. Yeah, you could also try doing this with bowling balls, with the pygmy bowlers. So again, hug pocket, pickpocket, and then use the Force, grab an extra bowling ball. Going forward, there's going to be a lot more creative uses with the Saber, because the choice on what you use it on is not so obvious. Prior to the Green Ops nerf, it was just a no-brainer. Like, best case scenario, you use it in the war and you get loads of green smoke bombs. Now, I think it opens up the playing field a bit and creates some more interesting decisions on how to use this most effectively.
How do people feel? There's a great word coined here by Scott, which is Gropocalypse.
I feel like it is a pretty reasonable nerf, because I just feel like strategies where you go all out and throw so many resources just chasing down the Grops is not as interesting. I think now that it's down to 1 bomb, there's a lot more interesting directions and decisions we can make with the Saber and some of our other resources, rather than just going all in on that as a dominant strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I like that it opens up the decision space. Grops was just so good that you had to have an excellent argument to consider using it somewhere else. Now we can use it, let's say in Standard, save more macrometeorites. I think using 2 forces on Lobster Frogman is probably the correct move now, and open up 4 extra macrometeorite uses. You can Saber, you're essentially trading resources. So if we go back to our goatlet again with the 3 monster zone, instead of using maybe a banish and a macrometeorite and an olfaction, if we run into a first turn dairy goat, we could just use the Force and say, I want to encounter 3 of them, or do the mentioned pickpocket strategies. And now you've saved a banish and a macrometeorite. So you're just trading these resources around.
Absolutely. The door is very much open. What are a few more good examples of possible Saber uses left?
You don't want to use the yellow ray in zones that have delay. So unfortunately, using this like in the airship, because it ends the combat and gives you the items, you actually didn't spend that turn of delay. So you might be better off, if you're going to use the banish or the yellow ray, do it in zones where there is no delay. So later on in the run, after you've done your desert and decided whether you need a killing jar, I think this would be a good opportunity to go back and grab the killing jar from the Banshee Librarian. You can also save yellow rays. This is something you'll hold all the time. Save your disintegrate for unexpected uses, or do things like I can yellow ray a bean bat and calculate for my 151 frat orc and mix and match the 2.
And from an aftercore perspective, this is obviously quite volatile. You'll have to check them all, check which items are doing particularly well, which are underfarmed, which are overfarmed, and then change your plan accordingly. But a good bet is probably Mojo filters. Use like a Clover to get a load of turns of ultra hydrated. You would then use you would force a friend copy on a Scarab Beetle, and then use a concoction of friend forces and yellow rays / capping the drop using a perfectly fair coin and 900% item drop, because it is a 5% drop. But again, you have to kind of check them all day to day to figure out what's the best option. But that's a cool 8k minus whatever your opportunity cost is per scarab beetle. So that's something to keep in mind. Moving on, let's talk about Monsieur Bob's excellent run.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Cramco. See how the sausage is made, taste the sausage, watch the sausage save 23 turns, and generate 23 more. Order yours today at the Mall of Loathing.
Bob, congratulations, an absolutely superb run there.
Thank you.
First of all, I guess, is that how did you plan your run? Was there anything you specifically had to account for?
I did 3 one-day softcore runs. I think for me, I plan a little bit, but I think the best way for me to improve is just to play runs and see what happens and learn from the mistakes I make along the way. So my first run was 570 turns, and that I had a consumption plan and a couple of pulls planned, and then I left a lot of it open-ended in case I needed to pull the alien milk or whatever it is, just for huge turn bloat. And that run went actually pretty well. So after that gave me a rough blueprint for what a one day looked like. I did a second run where I, sat down and looked at all the, banishes and macro meteorites and other resources I had available and kind of budgeted those out. I made a spreadsheet where I tried to figure out the relative value of, using a banish or an additional banish in each zone, which got a little bit tedious after a while. So I just started ballparking stuff, and that run went well. And then that was pre-saber. So, I was hoping to kind of sit on that one, but then the saber came out, and that, was going to save 20 plus turns probably. So did another saber run and got pretty incredible RNG on the run, and hit 502 turns.
So what was the run you were previously going to sit on? How many turns was that?
That was 529.
So you'd saved 20 turns and then some. So that goes to show you the power of the saber and also the power of good RNG.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there an RNG moment that was particularly defining?
There's a couple of them. One is that I hit 2 different semi-rares. One was Barbara Ann for the Stonewall. And then the second one, I got the meat inhaler from the top floor of the castle.
Oh, beautiful.
While looking for the Shen snake, I think, that's in there. And so, that saves a bunch of turns on nuns, which was super nice. And then this is kind of a weird thing that's like kind of good, kind of bad. When I was looking for the plus combat latte ingredient in the dark heart, I just got a natural 3-turn zone there. So missed the latte ingredient, which meant my ninjas were kind of bad, but I don't think you can complain about a 3-turn fire zone ever.
Absolutely not. Just ask Scotch, whose average fire turns is something like 35. Something awful anyway.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Was there any examples of particularly bad RNG? Now, obviously, every run has at least maybe 1 or 2 instances of really poor RNG. Does anything stick in your mind there?
Yeah, let me just run through my spreadsheet. Ninjas was not great. The cranny in the crypt was bad. It took me, I think, 12 turns to clear that. I think I was expecting to spend about 10 turns there because my one-day plan involved using 5 dieting pills for all my spleen.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to spend a bunch of turns there just to get the dieting pills. But after that was done, I was running probably 30% non-combat and a bunch of monster level to try to finish that in like 2 more turns, and I just could not get the non-combat to save my life.
Yeah, those swingy zones are the bane of everyone's Ascension. Let's have a little look at your pull list, which is on the sheet 3 of this spreadsheet. Obvious pulls are kind of your turn gen pulls, which are your Vampanes, your Spice Melange, Ultra Mega Sour Ball, etc. And your blood soaked sponge cakes. Now, An interesting one here is you pulled 2 odor extractors. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
I used one on bloopers, and I used one on our friend, the Green Ops soldier. For the blooper, just managing macro meteorites and banishes gets a little tight. And so my plan was to try to minimize those resources in that zone. I'm not sure mathematically how many turns that saves, but just for getting 8-bit out of the way early with a chance of saving some resources.
Yeah, I think that was the right decision.
From the spreadsheet, you got a minimum turn 8-bit realm, so that, I mean, not obviously not accounting for the banishes, but nonetheless a minimum turn 8-bit realm, which is obviously very, very good.
Yeah, I think I used 5 banishes there and just 1 macro.
So you kept all your saber forces?
Yeah.
Right. Talk a little bit about the second order extractor and perhaps about your forces.
Sure. The second extractor, I think we kind of covered how powerful Grops were. Used one on Grops. I think I wished for a Grops. I used 3 of my Saber forces on Grops. I used the other 2 on Lobster Frogmen, so I could only need to spend 1 macro on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could probably defend going 5 Grops forces there and just using 4 more macros on the lobster frogs, but
a lot of that is dependent on how fast you're getting your flyering done.
Right, yeah.
And in a 1-day run where you've got so few banishes, those macros can really save the day. Instead of, obviously in places in a 2-day run where you can double banish, if you've only got either a macro and nothing, it's kind of better than to get a couple more free runs, probably. I think I definitely agree with you there. Whenabouts were you using the odor extractor? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how you want to maximize the use of the effect, that is?
Basically, you want to make sure if you're using it on the Green Ops soldier that it's going to last until you're done with the battlefield. Let me try to find this part of the run. Was to use it right after nuns.
Turn 3, 2, 3.
Yeah, actually the one that I wished for, which was right after nuns. Yeah, I think, looking back on it now, that meant that I didn't get any Grops before nuns, but I did it the first one after nuns, and what that meant was that I must have sabered the first one after, using the latte and perceive soul and the odor extractor. So I got 3 right away, and then my plan was to not overlap any of the saber uses.
Ah, okay.
Anytime I got Grops on the battlefield for the first ones, I would just use the saber. So the saber was going to guarantee an extra 6 instead of an extra 5.
That's defensible for sure. To try and maximize the number of Grops rather than overlapping them. Doing it this way means that you can pile on all your item stuff together. I assume you did the war in one big stint. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
You finished the nuns and then you finished the war, and then obviously you know how many bombs that you've collected afterward.
Yeah, I think I ended up with 22 bombs, I think I got in this run.
Going back to the pull list, so you've pulled a Muculent Machete. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'd pulled it in every run. It lets you skip the hidden park. I know we had a discussion before about you disagreed with that, which I think I've come around on. If you go in the hidden park running as much non-combat as you can, then you can get a bunch of useful items out of the dumpster. You unlock the hidden tavern, hopefully, so you can get the drink for the free runs from drunk pygmies.
It comes down to, especially in a 1-day run, because banishes are so tight, is if you end up going into the hidden park, you can relocate the pygmy janitor, which could save you a banish in another zone, as well as unlocking the tavern, which saves you a banish on the drunk pygmies.
Yeah, so I think if I were to do another one of these, I think I'd probably take the machete off the list. Although I've also had runs where, I'm running maxed non-combat in the hidden park and just get combats every time. And then I've spent 7 turns and the janitor's still bouncing around.
Let's talk about the facsimile dictionary. What was that? What was the purpose of that pull?
Just auto sell it for meat which means you can fuel up your bread car right away. It means you can unlock torso awareness right away and start leveling faster. My first run, I tried to avoid using a pull on meat, and the routing just became really tough. And so I ended up pulling like a gold wedding ring or something on like turn 65 of that run. That was the point where I decided for future runs, just get the meat early. It gives you probably an extra bread card banish. It gives you extra, you can use the buffs from the bread card to get, item or monster level or whatever else you're looking for. And it just opens up a lot more flexibility when you're able to manipulate that.
It allows you don't have to be as resourceful because you've got so much, quote unquote, so much meat that you can afford to be a little bit wasteful, which is nice. You've also pulled a Lover Namarang. Where did that go?
That went to a ninja assassin.
That's not bad. It sounds like you're 8 turns in your lair.
And I'd used 2 Namerangs on assassins, so it took me 8 turns to find the first one. That was the downside of not getting the plus combat to the latte.
What is the plus side of using a Lover Namarang compared to pulling the ninja gear?
Really basically the same, if you're throwing it into a delay zone, but I think it's probably actually strictly worse because you could just run that turn in delay zone with Kramco and maybe get a free fight out of it.
A counterpoint for that would be you have to spend a turn in a delay zone anyway, right? Using an Amarang to put a monster there and burn delay is ever so slightly better, no? However, for example, if you put the assassin in the desert, where you'd be fighting a desert monster or the assassin, and you've got no chance of running into a Kramco because you have to put the compass on, that would strictly save a turn, right? Anyway, this is just obviously this is just thinking about it a little bit, but a solid pull. One interesting pull is the chrome ore. I can't remember if you mentioned that was because something happened with the mountain man, or that was always the plan. But do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, that was definitely not the plan. My plan was to enamarang the mountain man that I wished for. And the advantage of that is you can fight the first one without using an otoscope or, a champagne charge to cap it. You fight the first one, you have, pretty high item drop. You probably can get to like 700 just with a spant and bat form and all that. So you have a pretty solid chance of getting 2 of the ore you need from your first mountain man. And then on the second one, if you don't need to cap it, then you're saving resources. That kind of falls apart when you fight the first mountain man and you forget to use your Namarang and you don't have a clover to spare to go to the mine and get another one. So I got lucky there because I fought the first mountain man. It wasn't capped. I did manage to get both of the chrome ores that I needed from it, but then I had to spend a pull. At that point, I think it was absolutely correct to pull it.
Absolutely.
Especially because it was a 1 clover day, which was tough. So I threw all 3 of those clovers at the Zeppelin mob. If I'd had a 4th clover, so if it was a 2 clover day, then maybe I used the 4th clover for the ore and then pull something else instead.
Which goes to show you how adapting on the fly to your situations is absolutely imperative in speedy runs. Speaking of which, we didn't mention in my hardcore run lift, I died to all 3 love encounters at the very start of the run, right?
I was with you when that happened. It can be demoralizing.
Absolutely.
But what it really means is it just guarantees that you're going to have a great run because Dictator started that trend in Disguise's Delimit.
Where he died to the king and then got a 1-run gold.
Yep.
Yeah, adapting to your situation is absolutely imperative and not losing your cool. Just because you make a mistake doesn't mean you can't get a gold run, as shown by Bob and as shown by me as well.
I have another example of kind of the good RNG that I got on this run. I said I used 3 clovers on the Zeppelin mob, and that was, I managed to get my sleaze damage up where I was getting either 26 or 27 turn. That meant I ended up getting 3 adventures with clovers, and then that got me to 79. So It took me 4 turns, but only 3 clovers. As part of that sleaze damage, I needed to get the midriff scrubs from the Pygmy Orderlies. And so I actually used my Bread Car Missile Yellow Ray thing on Pygmy Orderlies, which I later found out the midriff scrubs are a conditional drop because they're a shirt. I got them from that combat, but yeah, that was just lucky.
We could pretend that the missile made it happen, and then that will make us feel better, right?
That's what I thought at the time.
I feel that you really need to save champagne charges for plastic pirates.
That was your top level strat, wasn't it?
Fun fact, they don't have anything to drop.
And running away doesn't progress the zone either. It was just, it felt bad. Lastly, we've got two kind of like, I guess you can call these flex pulls, which was the wet stew and the 11-foot pole. Anything you want to mention about those, Bob?
The pole saves, just like strictly 4 turns every time in the dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
That is not really fiddly at all, especially to do a 1-dayer, you have to go through the dungeon. And we talked before in DG how those elemental traps can be really tough on your HP and your healing. Nice for kind of quality of life too. The wet stew, there's probably a better pull mathematically, but when I budgeted out my macro meteorites and my banishes, I was like, if I can skip this zone entirely and not worry about that, great.
That's a fantastic run, Bob. We're going to move on now to discussing gold runs in general, but also the evolution of routing with some perspective on DG, which obviously you'll be able to add quite a lot into. When you're planning a gold run, I have a look at the top of the leaderboard, and let's say that the top leaderboard run is 450 turns. That means I need to generate at most 450 turns. This means that if I don't hit day count, because I've spent too few resources on turn generation and too many on turn cutting, I don't make day count, but that doesn't really matter if all you care about is going for that gold run. So you want to invest your remaining resources, whether it be pulls or like wishes or banishes or whatever, to save turns rather than to create turns. And this is essentially what happened in Dark Gift, because at first we were spending a bunch of resources on turn gen. I think the progress was people wishing for a naughty sorority nurse, and then the possessed wine rack 50-50, then even blackberry bushes was another one. And then once a solid route really started to emerge in the community, that's when these turn generating resources fell out of favor. To give a really good example is that we were drinking 2 to 3 red Russians from the gauntlet, which are only, compared to the war booze, are 6 turns worse than the war booze. But we were drinking 2 to 3 of those because we didn't need those extra 12 turns to hit day count. You would get just enough turn gen so that you could get to level 11 before you needed to fight blackberry bushes to give you some roll-ups. And you also needed to drink 2 red Russians so that you could cap the billiards room, because you needed 2 drunk to get the 2 pull skill, because you have the base of 10 from your semi-rares, your pull Q for +3, chalk for +3, and then drinks for +2, which equals 18, which caps the billiards room. And there was also the hippie trick.
Yeah, the hippie trick was when you're starting the war, hope that you get a hippie outfit before you get to start the war non-combat, and then what you can do, spend a single turn on the battlefield, and you get that encounter that gives the paddle phone, and then put on your hippie outfit, sell the paddle phone to the hippies, and that gives you 3 coins, which you can buy one of the consumables with. So it's just a way to squeak in 1 extra premium blood bag food or booze.
Bob, this was a discussion we had at the very start of the season, was moon sign. What we thought might be the best moon sign, and then what we changed our minds and why.
So you could go, I think Blender ended up being dominant. I don't think I actually did a non-Blender run ever, and I did, I think, like 25 Dark Gift runs. The part of the routing meant that we had to hit our leveling targets. So we needed to get to the Goatlet, so level 8, by turn 40 in order to get some red Russians. And then after that, we needed to within that window, make it to level 11 to get to the blackberry bushes. So getting the garbage shirt to double, stat gains out of a bunch of scaling fights that we had, wherever else you could throw them, ended up being really important.
You're right, Blender was decided upon fairly early. The only counterpoint was, well, now clovers are
Right.
super important because we don't know whether day 2, a 1 or 2 clover day,
Right.
Marmot was thrown about as an idea, but then you'd lose the intrinsic plus 10% missed experience buff from the moon sign. Early on, people were pretty much in agreement, like garbage shirt was essential. We needed Blender.
Especially, I think for hardcore, if you could, you wanted to start on a 2 clover day. So, that guarantees, assuming barrel cranks, that you have 5 clovers, which is generally enough. Yeah.
Yes, we go Blender. We have the ability to purchase torso awareness, but that's 5,000 for a bus pass plus another 5,000 for torso awareness. That's a lot of meat. And so how did that change our routing?
Yeah, and that's also meat that you then can't spend on fueling up the bread car. And that's a tough one too. In order to get wads of dough in Blender, you have to buy them 2,000 meat at a time.
Big chunk of meat.
Generally, I think what I would do is, and I think other people, you try to get to the bat hole as soon as you can. The boss bat bodyguards, have a super high meat drop. So hopefully get a body spradium out of the daycare. Hopefully you get your meat buff from the KGB case. Just hoping for whatever extra meat boost you could get, and then sing along with the boombox. And you could be getting upwards of 1,500 meat per bat bodyguard.
So this presented another issue because that meant we needed sonars. And since clovers are tight, we have ideally 5 that are already spoken for, 4 in the Zeppelin, 1 for the ore. How are we getting the sonars? So that was the next challenge in routing.
This is also before we have a spant, because we need that meat early. We need that meat before we've got the spant, because we've not done our leveling. And the reason that we need the meat in the first place is to put the shirt on to get our leveling to get the spant. So it was like a vicious circle of what we needed. So we essentially had to try and cap a 10% item drop with 900% item when we couldn't really cap that much. I think we could get to about 800, 850 with the KGB buff. Does that sound about right?
Something like that, yeah.
That's with Otoscope and the Champagne. You could almost cap. It was like a 95% chance.
And then speaking of meat issues, I think you could absolutely guarantee exactly 900 if you fueled the bread car and drove observantly.
But this is how the routing develops. You have a problem. So in this case, it was that, well, first of all, it was that we wanted level 12 to get the war food back when that was an issue. We want to get level 12 ASAP to get the war food, but that eventually turned into we wanted to get to level 12 so that we could wish for a Grops and then use the saber to force friends on the Grops, which means we need to level quickly, which means we need the shirt, which means that we need 10k meat. Where do we get 10k meat? Well, we've got very few options in the early game apart from the beefy body bat, to quote Phil. But this creates new problems. Where do you get those 3 sonars from? Well, you have to cap them. Can we cap them? No. Does that mean we have to spend resources? Yes. But all these play down into, well, you make the best of the situation you've got to do the greater good, and you invest accordingly. And that's basically how the boss bat stuff happened. Let's talk now a little bit about wishes. So obviously, it moved from turn generation to turn cutting. Bob, you want to go through some of the solid wishes for both hardcore and softcore were?
I'll talk about 1 day softcore first. So I ended up pulling 3 wishes, so probably about the same. But you want to fight a mountain man for sure. You want to fight a green ops soldier. And you probably also want to fight a frat boy spy or whatever other war monster you want to fight to get your outfit. Beyond that, in 1 day you're limited to 3 fights, so that's what I did. Hardcore, because you have 2 days, so more fights. You could also wish for Bob or Ann to get 3 stone walls. For effects, I think what ended up being dominant was using 50 ways and dirty pair in order to get up to, if you could start with 100 sleeves damage, using those 2 wishes and 4 clovers meant you could do a forward turn Zeppelin Mob.
And then we just had our flex wishes, which we'll talk a little more about when we talk about some of the random elements to this run, but you potentially had to save one for your elemental tower test. It was really nice to have a wish just in case for the astronomer. He could be extremely difficult to find.
I actually don't think I ever had a run where I didn't find an astronomer before I'd finished getting all my stars and lines.
You've hereby cursed yourself for the next 10 runs.
Probably.
You're never going to see an astronomer ever again.
Well, now I have a space jellyfish, so it's fine.
Wait, what's a familiar? I've forgotten what a familiar is after all these dark gift runs.
It's like an ensorcel that you can swap out at will.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it's way worse.
Barbad started to fall out of favor. It was a staple at first, and then it fell out of favor when we started to realize that the zone had 85% combat. So if you ran plus 15 combat, you would be able to get 2 sheep in a matter of like 3 to 4 turns. So people just started doing that / trying to get a semi-rare during the window. Let's talk a bit about ensorcels. What were our go-to ensorcels and how did they change?
Immediately turn 0, Goblin was always the one because it helped you during your free fights. Then after that, there was some decisions to be made. Snakes, we thought, were a pretty big deal. It could be up to plus 300% meat, which would be for the nuns, but that meant getting rid of your spant. And then there was also the slimes, which I personally preferred to help you cap your initiative for the modern zombies. It went from we really need to swap out our spant and for a snake and then go back to a spant to considering maybe not even doing the nuns in certain runs and just try and high roll green smoke bombs to I think my preferred ensorcel to the end if it was available would be start with Goblin, go to a slime, into a spant, and keep that spant all through day 2 and then just use those toward the ends of day 2. Tomb Rats or something just as free runs and then finally a weird for the Wall of Skin.
That was also my preferred route in the end.
In Softcore, it was a slime day, so I went Goblin, Slime, Spant. And we found out that if your slime was big enough, you had enough in it, you could actually get the jump on Spants, which was nice, and it saved you some Crimbo needles.
Speaking of the deceased Crimbo tree, Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about how that became MVP and how it was like an unfound gem that suddenly appeared to us all?
One of the challenges that we talked about in DG was taking damage and healing. Got knocked down to 0, it was going to cost you a turn, basically. Being able to run the Crimbo tree in certain zones, I'll let you guys talk about where you used it, but you could use it in the Love Tunnel, you could use it in the Space Gate if you didn't have a Goblin. I'm sure you guys probably had better uses for it than I did. It was really nice in spots where you absolutely did not want to be taking damage.
Yeah, the Gremlins was amazing, especially on day 1. The emergency, I'm fairly low on health and I need to heal up. And so I would like to wear this to protect from damage so that I can crush twice and then Dark Feast to get my health back up to a comfortable level, swapping in and out during the early parts of a run to maintain a health pool.
Absolutely MVP. Something that I'll try not to forget about in standard runs because there's probably like some niche use for it there as well.
I also found new love for the Song Boom Staying Alive, the 15% D-level and some potion that gives you extra DR. I use that during flyering especially.
So moving on lastly to some other issues that obviously in high-end runs we really wanted to get bounties for the older extractors, particularly for the Grops. You wanted an older extractor for the Grops, and the best bounty in run was the Plaque of Locust because it was essentially free, no extra resources spent, no extra turns spent because you have to explore the desert anyway. There are a few other manageable bounties, including Ninja Janitors, Copperhead Bartenders, Black Panthers, Pygmy Accountants. Also wanted to have like either a snake, but that probably turned into slime later on day 1, so that we could do the alcove with like plus 300% initiative. And then day 2, I think it turned out that after hating Ghost because of all the elemental damage it does on day 1 when you don't want it to because it kills you, it ended up being optimal for day 2 because of the turd key from the Ghost in the Abu Peak. I can't remember which one's it called. Lift.
As a Watsian Commando Ghost.
The one that drops the turd key because it's a super niche strategy where you could get up to 5 turd keys, obviously from the 5 ghosts that you have to kill, because the turd key works 100% of the time versus ghosts. So you could run away from the angry ghosts to save like up to 5 turns, which is really nice. We also needed 2 clovers on at least one of the days. So that's like a 2 clover day and a 1 clover day was fine, but ideally two clover days. And then lastly, there was the whole level 13 quest. Sleaze level 13 test is free. Stench was okay. Spooky was okay because you could time the spooky forest to get the fake blood. So that was okay. But cold and hot was basically a wish. Which test did you get on your run, Bob?
The one day I had Sleaze, which was lovely. I think there was maybe one run where I had cold, and I managed to hit 96 cold without using any extra resources on it. So I actually got number 2 on that one, but that required the cold water bottle from the
Drunk Pygmy?
Yeah, I think I got the cold water bottle out of dumpster on that run.
Nice.
Yeah, without that, I would have had to burn a wish on it. You would start a run and go look at your telescope, and if it was cold or hot, you're just sad.
With hindsight now, I would definitely spend a wish on hot test because the rerouting to fit 8-bit in line with the semi-rare window was so miserable, as far as it just introduced so many new wrinkles that if I ever got a hot again, I think I would just save the wish.
The Erosion Seeker found out with his accidental spading, the friends actually delete your semi-rare, right?
Yeah, just completely overrides it. It's high enough in priority, and the way it interacts is if it's a semi-rare turn, the friends don't get suppressed, so it's just gone.
The route was so smooth and so kind of rigid that the rerouting for the 8-bit was just awful, wasn't it?
Just terrible. I think Scotch, along with his Friar turns, I think he got hot test way too many times and could attest to rerouting was probably just not worth it in the end.
The route, just to go very quickly, was the kitchen into the 8-bit, into an 8-bit banish, into bats for meat. Then you buy the shirt, go into the 8-bit realm, get to level 8, take off the shirt, go into the billiards, do the library, put the shirt back on, do the NEP, around turn 45 to get the last of your lobotomy turns with the NEP and other free fights, and then you would push for level 11, level 12.
And then while your stats were buffed, grab your spand.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Our kind of closing comments are that we kind of hope that future avatar paths remove the need for specific days to ascend, like clovers and bounties. One thing to mention is that my hardcore run did not get a bounty, but the reason was that I was about to go for a bounty, and then I got a first turn ninja assassin on a ninja janitor day for the bounty, and we decided collectively that it was better to play the hand that was given, not the hand that was expected, and I didn't go for the bounty. So in that run I got like 26 bombs, but I also saved 5 banishes and let's call it 8 turns. So 30. So let's say I got 13 more bombs. I would have only broken even had I gone for the bounty, for example. So that's a good example of using what hand you're given rather than what hand you're expected. Last comment is also that in avatar paths is that gold runs are essentially the same as any other high-end run. It's just who gets the better smoke bomb look, who gets the better RNG, and then the biggest run killers are obviously like the Forest, the Friars, which is why we've pushed for the Friars to be changed a little bit, either to make it slightly slower, average, but with a much shorter tail, so you don't have as bad as a 48 turn Friar, which is absolute worst case, and it does happen even when you're running high non-combat. And very, very lastly, we'd like to mention that Booyah's 454 DG run was really an insane run. It didn't have a bounty. It didn't have a saber. If saber didn't exist, I expect that run very likely would have been gold. It was a really good, incredible run.
I think so. It was an incredible run.
Very, very, very good run. I think that about wraps it up for us today. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Violet, thank you so much for going through the PvP for us.
Anytime.
Lift, any closing comments?
It was a lot of fun. We'll just mention that who ran the numbers? I think it was Captain Scotch, that there was at least 15,000 runs of Dark Gift done while it was in season. So it was very popular, and yeah, I had a great time running the path.
One of the most popular and competitive paths we've had in a long, long time. And one thing I want to mention is that if you look at the leaderboard, almost everybody on that leaderboard is connected to the Ascension Speed Society, which is absolutely fantastic to see. Final comment is that we think one day hardcore unrestricted is possible, which is crazy, but the numbers look like it's possible, so maybe that will happen. We'll see. So thank you everyone, and good morning, night, day, etc.